Let's now get some more analysis on the UN's General Assembly sitting with Thembisa Fakude, who's an Africa-Asia senior researcher. Thembisa, thank you so much for joining us. Your expectations on the upcoming talks at the Assembly?
Well, there's so much has happened over the past couple of hours, and I think that's going to dominate the agenda. One, of course, is the current standoff in Italy, where over 7,000 immigrants are stuck at the moment. And we saw earlier on the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, going there. So that is a major story which has emerged or breaking today. Then we've got two natural disasters which have occurred, one last week in Morocco and the other one in Libya. So notwithstanding that, all of us would like to have our issues and agendas amplified at the UN. There are certain issues that have since crept in over and above what has been happening, of course, in Ukraine. So you are likely to have those dominating the agenda, but not only dominating the agenda. I think even the television cameras and the news will be looking at what's happening in Italy at the moment in terms of migration, and the two continuing stories, which is Libya and Morocco.
Look, Thembisa, maybe just give us more depth into that in relation to the immigration crisis, because I feel like we're not necessarily paying enough attention to the current impasse that we have around immigration issues in the country at this stage. So what would you like to see happen at the Assembly, or spoken about, or some of the resolutions even that could be taken at this sitting in relation to, of course, the immigration crisis that is a global pandemic at this stage?
Well, it is, but I think, it's very difficult to expect the UN to come up with a position. I think the position should be that of national governments, because the reason why we have people risking their lives and taking these dangerous journeys across the Mediterranean is because they're felt by their governments. So that's the first point. And the countries that are currently receiving these immigrants, particularly Greece and Italy, are complaining that they are not sharing this burden, or the EU and other developed nations in the world are not sharing this burden with them. South Africa is also suffering from the same, because there is a South-South migration, which very few people talk about. Again, it's because of these failed nations that are not taking care of their people, and as a result, people will continually, as expected, go and look for better opportunities elsewhere. So there has to be a position in terms of migration, but often those kind of positions are about the humane treatment of immigrants into countries, and not necessarily about preventing the immigrants coming into these countries, because the only way you can prevent immigration, particularly this type of immigration that we've seen over the past couple of months at least, being amplified, is if you can have stable democracies, if you can have economic opportunities in these countries. But unfortunately, what we see in many of these countries are coups, wars, and dictators that continue to prevent the people from benefiting from the state.
And in relation to South Africa, Thembisa, at the back of the BRICS summit, of course, and resolutions, there's obviously geopolitical tensions with some of the attendants there, specifically the increased attention that has been put on the developing world by Western nations that are very eager to secure its support in efforts to isolate Russia. What do you say to those?
Well, I think when it comes to migration, we have to be careful, of course, about BRICS and, BRICS facilitating further influx of people in these countries, because I'm of the view that you are likely to have these walls of, travel restrictions between members of BRICS falling. And if those do fall, you are likely, again, to have these young people who are coming from countries such as China and India, Russia, fit for purpose, hungry and ambitious, coming into these countries. And I'm not quite sure whether our own can really compete with these people in terms of the price of labor that we'll be asking and all other things that comes with it. So we also need to be careful of, jumping into these platforms. But I think, having said that, the UN General Assembly comes after 4 at least major platforms have had their own summits. G7 had its summit, G20, G77 not long ago, and BRICS. So one wonders what will be achieved at the UN General Assembly, except that it's another talk shop where those that ordinarily don't have airtime, particularly in the media, get a chance to speak to the world. But I don't think there's anything really serious that we'll see coming, except the same rhetoric that we've heard year in, year out over the years.
And Thembisa, what do you make of the current tensions between, of course, China and the US, with each nation trying to almost counter their pledges of money for development and climate aid? Surely this could even further divisions of the power tussle.
Well, I don't think so. I think both these countries have got their own partners in terms of the just energy transition. We know that some of them have had, just lip service in terms of what they intend doing. But we'll have to wait and see. I think the responsibility and the burden of executing all of these beautiful ambitions that all of us have lies with nation states. South Africa has got a responsibility to ensure that it pushes its own agenda forward and promotes its agenda forward, not piggybacking on these two big nations. But South Africa should champion, as President Cyril Ramaphosa has done in the past, champion all of these agendas, including the agenda of just energy transition. It must go there with a proper plan and demand certain things, and also at the same time promise to do certain things. But to continue piggybacking on these big countries, particularly China and the US, I don't think it will help us. But importantly, I don't think it will help the continent, because President Cyril Ramaphosa has kind of assumed the responsibility or the role of being the leader of the African countries when it comes to these matters. So he has to have an independent position, one representing South Africa, but at the same time with that representing the bigger African continent. And he must pronounce precisely how he intends pushing that agenda. But importantly, he has to make sure that this time around we're not shortchanged, as it has been the case with other major international agencies that we've seen over the past couple of years.
Look, and Thembisa, I mean, on the back of what you've just said, with championing South African issues, what will then South Africa benefit from this council sitting? I mean, especially with how we are currently postured in terms of our relations with our BRICS members. Do you feel that there's still a need for South Africa to be part of this council? We know that China has already pledged to assist with our energy crisis, as well as other pledges that were made, of course, during the BRICS summit. What do you think about these?
Well, South Africa will always be, like any other country, will always be part of the UN. Again, the only thing that I see benefiting us here is that it could just amplify the role of President Cyril Ramaphosa as the leader of the African continent in terms of social, political, and economic agencies that we face. But other than that, I mean, United Nations General Assembly is it's a talk shop. There's nothing that's going to be achieved there. You're going to have people screaming and shouting and making certain promises like it used to be the case. I mean, I used to enjoy the comical theater of people such as Muammar Gaddafi and Robert Mugabe and Saddam Hussein, but actually nothing really comes out of it. So we're gonna hear some interesting rhetoric coming from these leaders. Some of them will be, of course, complaining about how they've been oppressed over the years. President Cyril Ramaphosa is likely to amplify certain agencies when it comes to Africa. But again, it's a talk shop. I don't think anything will come out of it. It's going to be an interesting week for us to listen to what countries intend doing, and including the revised foreign policy. And we're all looking forward to who's going to be brave enough to condemn Russia, who's going to be brave enough to condemn the continual atrocities against the Palestinian people, and all the other oppressions that are taking place around the world. Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso is likely to be part of the agenda. We don't know who's going to be representing them this time around. But it will be interesting to know and hear those revised international relations policies. But other than that, I don't see anything really serious coming out of it, as it's always been the case over the years.
Thank you, Thembisa, for that analysis. Well, Mr. Thembisa Fakude says it's just a talk shop. He is an Asia-Africa senior researcher, and he was weighing in on the UN Assembly that will take place in New York next week.